Hi guys, hope everyone's well and welcome back to the Improvement Podcast. So in this episode 139, I'm going to touch on nutrition myths. So just pretty much some common kind of misconceptions and things I hear about nutrition that I believe either the general population or even people in the fitness industry, or not in the fitness industry in regards to working in it maybe, but who are involved in fitness, who go to the gym consistently, can potentially believe. And some kind of nonsense I hear floating about. So, to start off, the first one I kind of hear a lot is eating healthy is expensive, and I think this is something that some people use to maybe justify not having the ability to commit towards their fitness goals. And if you think about maybe what's the cheapest diet ever to kind of be on, you might find calorie for calorie, some, and maybe in some cases, I've not ran the numbers, some poorer food choices might be a bit cheaper, I don't know. However, for 99% of individuals, I don't think it's a reasonable excuse. And the reason being is when you when you're like thinking about how much like a food shop costs. For myself, for example, I spend around about £30 to £40 a week on my weekly shop. And throughout the week, I have salmon on my rest days, I have chicken, I have beef, I have whey, and I have fruit and vegetables with every meal. So I have like a healthy diet, and I'm eating 3,700 calories on my training days now. So a fair amount of food, and I get it for like a reasonable price. And if you think about, right, let's say you go to McDonald's on your break, you can easily spend a good £5 there. And think about kind of how much food you get for one meal at McDonald's in comparison to spending let's say £40 a week on a weekly shop. It really isn't that much in the grand scheme of things when you calculate maybe the price of eating out. And a fiver is that's kind of that's been on the safe side. Most likely, if you're gonna go and eat out, you're gonna spend more than that. Like for example, if you go Nando's, that's gonna be the best part of heading up to £20. Like a Domino's, at least a tenner in my opinion. So if you think about maybe the price of eating out a few times a week in comparison to eating relatively healthy foods, it's not expensive, and I don't think that's like a reasonable reason to maybe not adhere to a diet and to not have like a healthy diet. I think it's it's just like if it's just a case of kind of shopping around and being smart and strategic. And am I saying like the diet I'm on, you can't get any cheaper than that? Definitely not. Like you can even get maybe cheaper food choices. Like if you really ran numbers, you could kind of, instead of having bagels, have more rice, etc., and just have like don't have salmon, that sort of thing. Don't have beef and go for like cheaper quality protein sources. You can play about with things like that and go for maybe the higher fat mince instead, whole eggs, etc. There's a lot of healthy foods you can kind of go for that are a relatively good price. And when you think about the price of a night out, I think it's fair to say you can spend £50 on just like alcohol alone, not including maybe eating something after from a takeaway on a night out. That's the price of my shopping for a week. So in the grand scheme of things, for most individuals and how they live their lifestyle, it's not actually that expensive. They just need to kind of change their habits and change their kind of perception on what is expensive. And in terms of like your health, you also, I don't think you can put a price on your health as well, and it's going to be like a much better kind of investment. You're going to feel better in yourself physically and mentally, most likely, if you have quality foods in your diet. So next up, something I hear a lot is like the importance of breakfast. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and I don't really think that is the case. And the reason being is when it comes to like breakfast, why, like what I'd question is, why is it the most important meal of the day? Like there's nothing magical eating first thing in the morning upon wake. If you're trying to maximize muscle growth, there is benefit in having your protein servings spread out appropriately and having multiple protein servings a day, definitely, to spike muscle protein synthesis, to allow us to recover more effectively, to allow us to kind of repair that damaged muscle tissue and be in a better position to kind of build muscle and, when dieting, retain muscle. So that's definitely a benefit. However, there's not anything absolutely magical about eating first thing in the morning, especially if, like, let's say you train later in the day. Then I'd opt for maybe having less in the morning, not having much first thing, especially during dieting phases. If you're wanting to maximize your muscle growth, would I try and have a protein serving early in the morning? Definitely. But like if you skip breakfast, you're going to be fine. I think what's most important is adherence. What's going to allow you to hit your calorie goal and stick to your calorie goal best in a way you enjoy doing so. So when it comes to people dieting, they might actually be better off skipping breakfast. Yes, maybe it's not optimal when it comes to muscle growth and retention, but if they're having an appropriate amount of protein throughout the day and it allows them to adhere to their nutrition best, then that's probably what's going to be best for themselves. What I mean by that is, like, if someone has breakfast and it just causes them to kind of crave more food or want more food, then that might not be a good option for themselves, and they might prefer fasting, because people get on a lot better in some cases having like black and white rules, like not eating at all, because some people struggle with portion control and just moderation. So yes, obviously try and improve maybe your ability to practice portion control, but at the same time don't feel like you need to have breakfast. I think some studies indicate if you do have breakfast, it can lower your kind of calorie intake throughout the rest of the day and make you kind of eat less. And so it could potentially lead to better adherence. What I'd say is play about with it for yourself, but don't feel like if you don't eat the first few hours of the morning or that, or you kind of draw out that fasting window a bit longer, that you are going to have any kind of negative effects from that, or maybe you're missing very, very, very slight gains on the table, but you'll be fine. Like, if your goal was fat loss, if it's going to allow you to adhere better and adherence is a struggle, then maybe consider not having it or play about with it, because it means you've got more calories to eat in a shorter time frame, potentially leading to better adherence. So yeah, breakfast, I think, kind of, I believe, see where they say like breakfast is an important meal of the day. I believe that was actually something regarding marketing for like cereal companies to try and get individuals to buy their products, which is quite funny. And next up is salt is bad for you. So I think this is something that is becoming less and less popular, but still exists. Salt has many kind of electrolytes in it, like sodium, potassium, magnesium, and it's something very important for like nervous system function and for performing at your best, and we want an appropriate amount of each electrolyte, and having salt can help us achieve that. And salt can potentially increase blood pressure, and I believe the way it kind of works is basically you want to have like appropriate level of salt in your body. So if you've got, let's say, a high level of salt, your body wants to kind of dilute that, putting it simple, so you will have kind of more water in your blood, which will kind of increase kind of the blood pressure, if that makes sense. I believe that's how it works, or more blood. And then as a result, you will have higher blood pressure potentially from that, in some cases. So, but salt can also be shown to lower blood pressure, I believe. And a lot of things will impact how much salt is appropriate for yourself, like how much water you intake, because the more water you drink, the more salt you will kind of excrete through urination, because when we pee, we pee out sodium, we pee out salt pretty much. And when we also sweat, we will sweat out salt. So it will depend on our activity level, how much salt we potentially want to have, as well as how much water we're consuming. But salt is definitely not bad for you. You need kind of appropriate amount of salt, and not having enough salt will mean you can't perform at your best. You won't get as good pumps in the gym, and you will have maybe poorer energy, potential brain fog, and poorer like central nervous system function. So salt definitely isn't the enemy. What I'd say is, like, measure your blood pressure, play about with it, find out, and then kind of say increase your salt and see kind of how you feel on that maybe level of salt, and if you feel any benefit from it. And a good way to know if you're having enough salt is see if you feel like you crave salty foods, and that's typically your body telling you you kind of need salt. And that's kind of interesting, because most individuals, when they're hungover, they crave kind of junk food that is high in sodium, high in salt. So just because salt is in maybe some junk food doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. It's just kind of correlation, not causation, if that makes sense. So yeah, try having more salt, measure your blood pressure, see where it's at, and then if maybe you feel like you're benefiting from it, maybe stick to that higher salt intake. But like I said, it's based on the individual and your needs. You can also consider getting electrolytes from an electrolyte formula, but there's no need to kind of waste your money on them if you're not even attempting to salt any of your meals. So I'd start with just having an appropriate amount of salt. I personally have 2 grams of pink Himalayan salt and 1 gram of low sodium salt per meal, and that gives me an appropriate electrolyte balance, as you want an appropriate ratio of sodium, potassium and magnesium. It's not just about getting salt in, you want an appropriate ratio between them to ensure like optimal function. So salt definitely isn't bad for you, and there's a lot of kind of benefits of salt, as I've kind of touched on. And cramp is a common kind of thing some individuals get in the gym, and cramp can actually be from not having enough salt in your diet, because we need sodium present to basically stop contracting our muscles, to release kind of muscular contractions, if that makes sense. So if there's no sodium present, then we won't be able to kind of stop contracting our musculature, which is why people get cramp. And next up is like carbohydrates and fat make you fat. So quite kind of, I think, one that's kind of dispelled nowadays, but carbohydrates and fat both have their role, and you want an appropriate amount of each in your diet, ideally. And the reason being is carbohydrates are our main source of energy, so we ideally want them especially around the workout window, and fat has a role in slowing down the digestion and basically how fast you're releasing kind of protein and carbohydrates into the bloodstream. As a result, you might want to have fat pre-workout, or if you're not eating for an extended period, so you're not kind of burning through that food super fast. It's also very important for hormonal function, so we want to make sure we're getting enough fat in our diet for that. Fat is something super important. And as for like carbohydrates, like I said, they're our main source of energy, so ideally we want them around training. And also, like, to push food up when you are gaining, I do recommend kind of using carbohydrates due to digesting a bit faster than fat, and protein being satiating and a bit harder to digest, hence why carbohydrates are my preferred source to kind of push food up. But none of these kind of macronutrients none of them are the devil. Both are important, and what does make you fat is consuming an excess amount of calories. And maybe carbohydrates and fat can be a bit more easy to eat without getting full in comparison to protein, so there might be some truth to that. Not the fact that carbs and fat make you fat, but it's more likely going to make you overeat if, let's say, you consume a diet that's high in both of them and low in protein, which I think is definitely true. Like, if you aren't consuming much, like, well, try it yourself if you'd want to find out. Like, if you think about what foods are kind of high in carbs and fat and low in protein, typically it's not foods that are that healthy for you and not that filling. Protein is shown to be satiating. We burn more calories digesting protein, so it's typically good to aim for it. But like, having carbs isn't going to do anything crazy in terms of making you gain fat. If you're sitting at your calorie maintenance, you're going to be fine. If you're, let's say, eating more calories than you're burning, you're going to put on weight regardless of where you're getting those calories from. If you're eating less calories than you're burning, you're going to lose weight regardless of where you're getting those calories from. That doesn't mean it doesn't matter, because, like I said, it can play a big part in satiety, but we shouldn't kind of shy away from these macronutrients because they do also have their benefits. So just make sure you've got appropriate calories for your needs, and you will not gain kind of additional fat from it. Next up is sugar can be bad for you, and you shouldn't have sugar. So maybe sugar in very, very high amounts, I believe, may not be good for overall health, satiety again, maybe your kind of blood sugar levels and your teeth, but sugar can be beneficial, and sources of sugar can, well, like, you have sugar and fruit, don't you? Sugar is just kind of like a form of carbohydrate, and fructose, which is basically sugar that we get from fruit, can be beneficial. And first of all, like, I don't think someone, if they're trying to lose weight, they shouldn't have fruit due to its sugar content. The amount of calories that's in like fruit and the amount of sugar that's in it is not going to be kind of detrimental. The kind of place it can be detrimental is if you're kind of having it from maybe refined sources that aren't that filling, again, if your goal's fat loss. But having things like honey can be like beneficial, and that's a source of sugar, just to help kind of bump your calorie intake up and get some really easy, fast absorbing carbohydrates in your system. So there's times where we want carbohydrates that are easy to digest and fast absorbing if we're trying to replenish our glycogen stores, and if we're trying to maybe eat more when we're in a gaining phase. So it's not necessarily bad, and you want sometimes fast acting carbohydrates around the workout window. And as well as that, like, if we pair kind of fructose, which is kind of what we get from fruit, the type of carbohydrate we get from fruit, if we pair that with let's say having rice or any other sort of like slow digesting carbohydrate like fructose and glucose, it's shown that we kind of replenish our glycogen stores at a faster rate, which can be beneficial to kind of utilize those carbohydrates post workout to potentially replenish our glycogen stores if we are doing some sort of event. Let's say someone competes in, let's say, some sort of sport where there's multiple events, then that's something they may want to consider so that they maximize their uptake of carbohydrates. Or if someone's trying to eat more carbohydrates after kind of weighing in for a fight to perform at their best. And next up is you can only absorb so much protein. So you don't eat 2 chicken breasts and then after that eat unlimited calories from protein and not gain weight. That doesn't work like that. You can... Is there a benefit of having maybe like excessively high protein intake? It gets to a point where you're not really getting the value of having, like, more protein's not better. You're not getting more kind of benefit from having more protein intake. So if, let's say, you're already fulfilling your protein needs and you're having more protein, you're still going to absorb that. You don't kind of just, it doesn't just go right through you and you don't utilize any of those calories. It doesn't work like that. We will still utilize those calories we consume from protein. We'll basically turn them into kind of glycogen or carbohydrates. It is an inefficient process, meaning it's not as efficient as kind of eating carbohydrates for energy source than eating, let's say, additional protein. So if you're getting the calories you kind of need from protein, you are probably better getting other macronutrients like having more carbohydrates, having more fats, and getting kind of benefit of them. So it's not maybe bad having slightly more than you need, but if it's at the point that's detrimental to how much calories or how much kind of carbohydrates, if you're under eating carbohydrates and fats due to having so much protein, then it is detrimental, yes. But you can absorb whatever protein you eat. It just means you're not going to benefit from it further. I believe we need round about 20-25 grams, bigger individuals maybe 30 grams of protein to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, which is basically when we're in a good spot to kind of build new muscle tissue and we're not in a catabolic state, a state where we're basically, meaning in a state where we're not in a good position to kind of build muscle and we're breaking down muscle tissue. So to put us in an anabolic state, a position where we are in anabolic in nature, where we're got the ability to kind of build muscle and promote muscle growth, then if we've kind of fulfilled those needs, we're not going to get much kind of benefit from having more protein on top of that. So yeah, it's not that we kind of stop kind of uptaking those calories, but we're not getting the benefit of like having more protein than we necessarily need throughout the day. And next up is my metabolism's broke. I can't gain or lose weight. So you hear people say this on either end of the spectrum. People who believe they're overweight, people who believe they're underweight, or people who are just wanting to change their body weight, regardless of how their body weight is. People say they can't kind of change it, and you can't really defy energy balance. Yes, people can have maybe an underactive thyroid, which is basically like which can influence how much calories they can eat on a daily basis and what their maintenance calories is. But like if someone can't gain weight, like I've never ever seen someone who literally can't gain weight that was a client. It's either they're just not eating enough, and if you're saying you can't gain weight, log what calories you're eating on a daily basis, eat 200 more, see what your body weight does. If your body weight doesn't change, eat 200 more. If it doesn't change, repeat that process. You're going to eventually gain weight. You're just not tracking your calories, you're just not being consistent enough with your calorie intake, and you're not repeating that process and adding calories over time. So like if you tell me like you eat 10,000 calories a day and you're not going to gain weight, then I just do not believe it. You can kind of defy the laws of energy balance. You just can't kind of get around them pretty much. And when people say they can't lose weight, so your body burns like amount of calories on a daily basis. Your body needs kind of energy to move and to function and to be alive. So yes, some people's calorie maintenance might be lower than others and might need to eat less than others, but you can lose weight. You're just not eating enough. I know that that's sometimes not the best advice because it's not helpful, meaning I'm not helping you kind of gain weight. I'm just saying you can, you're just not doing it. And I can't help, like if I'm just saying to people who want to lose weight, you're just not eating little enough, then that's obviously not helpful because it's not helping them kind of do so. How can they actually do it and adhere to it? But you obviously can. It's just a case of eating less and putting strategies in place to allow you to do so. And people who do have maybe a really, really low calorie intake, then they might want to consider trying to build that up before dieting. But you can lose weight, you're just not eating enough. And you can gain weight, you're just not eating... Or sorry, you can lose weight, you're not eating little enough. I forgot the word little there. And if you can gain weight, you're just not eating enough calories. Next up is you shouldn't eat carbohydrates late at night. So what's going to influence what happens to your body weight is the amount of calories you eat on a daily basis. Let's say your maintenance is 2,500 calories and you're eating, let's say you're eating 2,600 calories, and you will gradually gain weight. So it isn't a case of you are, let's say, you're going to gain fat because you're eating more carbohydrates later in the day. You're going to gain fat because you're in a position where you are currently eating more calories than you're burning. The opposite applies. Like if you're eating, let's say you eat all your carbohydrates later in the day, but you're in a calorie deficit, meaning you're eating more or you're eating less calories than you're burning, you are going to still lose weight regardless of where your food's kind of positioned. Is it optimal to eat all your calories or all your carbohydrates before bed? Potentially not. Just like how it might not be good to eat in the morning, but there's nothing kind of bad about eating them later in the day. Do I recommend maybe centering your carbohydrates where you're going to be more likely to utilise them? For recovery purposes, your ability to build muscle and partition those nutrients towards building kind of muscle, potentially yes, there's a very, very, very minor benefit to it. But if someone's trying to lose weight, if they're in a calorie deficit throughout the day, then they're going to lose weight, even if their carbohydrates are ate later in the day. Doesn't mean it's optimal, but you're still going to lose weight. So there's nothing bad about eating carbohydrates at night. They can actually promote good sleep quality, so it can actually be beneficial because carbs can kind of, if you've ever let a lot of carbohydrates, you sometimes feel quite kind of sleepy and relaxed, and that's like a good reason why you might want to have them later in the day to kind of help in terms of sleep quality. And next up is whole food is better. So something I often hear is whole food is better than maybe having kind of things like maybe whey protein, which I think's a myth on its own, because the bioavailability of whey protein and whey protein isolate is very, very high. Bioavailability means how likely you are to kind of uptake and your body's likelihood to absorb it and utilise it effectively for like building muscle, let's say. And like I said, the availability of kind of whey protein isolates higher than things like eggs and other kind of whole food protein sources. So that is just wrong. Simple as that. Like whole food's not always better. There's benefit of kind of having things like whey isolate and things that aren't always kind of maybe whole foods, and some things that are you could class as processed. It doesn't automatically make it bad or the devil. Whole food, for the most part, I think it is good advice having the majority of your diet made up of whole food, but like it's not better than, let's say, whey protein, or there's nothing kind of wrong about having whey protein in your diet. It's not the devil. It can be beneficial. Can whole food be better in some circumstances for kind of satiety and helping you manage your hunger? Potentially, yes, because having like a protein shake, liquid calories, it's not that filling. It's going to digest faster as well, which isn't always good. But in some cases, let's say your food's very high, post-workout, you want to get a good amount of nutrients and protein in and carbohydrates in fast, then you might not want to eat a really slow digesting protein source that's quite hard to eat and filling, especially when your hunger's low. But saying that it's kind of a poor food choice is definitely not correct. So hope you enjoyed the video, or well, depending on what you're listening to this on, hope you enjoyed the episode, or if you're watching it on YouTube, obviously enjoyed watching, etc. Thank you very much for everyone's support as always. If you did enjoy the podcast, then feel free to share it on the story, drop me a tag. The support means an absolute ton.